What's going on, everyone?
Are we live?
Yeah.
Pretty cool, pretty cool. All right, so just a heads up, I'm back. My name's Anurag, and I'm here with Daryl Ayers. Hi,
Hello,
Daryl. How you
everyone.
doing?
All right, I suppose.
Pretty good. You are no stranger to the Magic community. Multiple performances. Glad to have you here. So just a heads up. Oh, looks like one sec. Got it. Sorry. Seatbelt a little bit. Yeah. So just to fill everybody in, we have started match 2 out of potentially 5 in the finals. Both players are on Miracles with Caleb on the play, I believe. And board state as is, a little bit of land go. Julian does have a Sensei's Divining top in play.
Julian's hand looks like it's panning out much better anyways. He's got a third land atop, and Caleb's sitting on no third land, no way to filter his draws. I just assume at Julian's instep, he's probably going to have to flash in the Snapcaster just to do something.
Right, yeah. And looking at Caleb's hand, he does have multiple blue spells. So basically, this Snapcaster really is the only playable. I mean, running out an Ambush Viper just feels gut-wrenching, but, given Caleb's hand, his draws, maybe that's what he's
Wow, this
doing.
is pretty crippling for Caleb, too. He's going to have counterbalance top, a mana up to spin, too, and then Caleb's just kind of treading water. Not to mention next turn, once Julian sees him skipping all these land drops, he's going to smell blood in the water. He could flip his top, play Mentor, and there's really not much Caleb could do about it. I'm not sure if Julian will get that aggressive, being he doesn't know if Caleb has a force, but I'm guessing he knows that he has a suspicion he doesn't, being he hasn't played one up to this point.
Right. I mean, the counterbalance is so powerful in this matchup that you almost snap Force of Will it, especially game 1 if you can. That Julian, was able to resolve the counterbalance is a clear shout out that Caleb's hand is very, very weak right now.
Yeah, I'm surprised Caleb didn't mulligan. I can't confirm that he did or not, but just guessing on the number of cards in his hand, it's not looking like he did mulligan.
Yeah, it looks like on Caleb's turn 4, he has 10 cards? 7.
Yeah, so
9,
it looks like he kept 7. It looked like a good 7 to keep, I'm guessing, because he was set up with some counterbalances and some good top end, but
yeah, I mean, likely what happened was it was like 2 counterbalances, a Tundra and a Plains. In between rounds, if we can get Caleb to confirm what his opening 7 was. But yeah, I mean, it's quite unfortunate. At this point, Caleb draws the Divining Top right after Julian resolves his counterbalance, meaning the top is simply going to get countered if, Caleb does try to resolve it.
Yeah. And at this point, the game's based. I can't think of a way that Caleb comes back unless Julian just draws running bricks. It needs to be almost all non-fetch lands, because if he draws a fetch land, he can shuffle up and hit spells or something for this counterbalance top. And I think Caleb needs to be able to terminus away this Mentor in order to have a chance.
Right, absolutely. Unfortunately, Julian draws probably one of the best cards that he could have in Force of Will, which is just sort of that, all-around insurance for whatever kind of nonsense Caleb might have.
Exactly. That might have been a greedy brainstorm on Julian's side. I think it's possible he should just let that counterbalance resolve, because he's gonna. It looks he might have an easy route to victory here, especially because if Caleb has a top, he can't play it, being Julian's tops on top of his deck. And when he brainstorms like that, he loses his only blue card. So if Caleb did have another swords, he'd be clear to go in the upkeep in this next turn.
Right, and
or draw step rather. I'm sorry.
I think what Julian's plan was to maybe brainstorm, either find a 2 or another blue card to put it back on top. Now, unfortunately, Julian's got neither of these, so it's looking a little grim in terms of, I mean, this counterbalance is going to resolve for sure. Now, the question is, Julian's doing a very next level play here. He's putting the Entreat on top and not the Divining top, or not like a 1-drop to stop, any potential cantrips or Divining tops or anything like that. I wonder if Caleb is going to jam the Divining top or not.
What was the second card down that he put? I didn't get a glimpse of it as he brainstormed.
Force of Will.
Gotcha.
So Julian is going all in on this Entreat the Angels.
This seems far too risky for how ahead he is, in my
So
opinion.
yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with the brainstorm there. It's hard to say. Potentially he could have just spun the top, found a 2 or not, and if he didn't, he could have just forced the bull to counterbalance and went on with his life. This line is, it's definitely more aggressive for sure.
Funnily, the top of Caleb's deck is a force as well. I think if I were Julian, I would have just left the Entreat, probably the second card down, or maybe just held it in my hand. And then I would have, on this turn, I think I would have led with Swords to Plowshares to see if it was safe to redeploy my top. Because if he doesn't reveal for his counterbalance, trying to sandbag a blind flip for your top, then you get another token, you get a prowess, you get in for 5 damage. And even if you play top after that, it feels like you're just so far ahead, and you're hitting for a huge chunk of damage, and likely coming over for a lethal next turn when that Entreat comes off the top to prowess for 3-ish monks and a mentor token too, and the mentor itself.
Definitely agree with you. And even at Caleb's best draw here would be a copy of Terminus, and if somehow Julian doesn't manage to stop it, it's not like it really matters. He's got way more mana. He's got countertop online. Having Sensei's Dividing Top by itself is amazing because you have future filtration for the next few turns. But I think it's panning out for Julian.
Keeping in mind what you said about Terminus being Caleb's best draw, instead of putting the force, the second card down, it's possible that Julian could have put Terminus under the Entreat and then drawn Entreat and then just had protection from Terminus, and then he'd have a huge board. He could get Terminus and just crack back for lethal this turn after playing Plow and Sensei's Divining Top.
Right. My guess is that Julian, probably thought that because Caleb wasn't playing anything, that his hand was either a bunch of white spells or a bunch of Force of Wills.
Gotcha.
If you're not casting, it could also just be cantrips that you couldn't cast into countertop. But maybe the safest card, it's like a hedge. Either you think one thing or the other. So if he has the Force of Will, then you put the Force of Will back on top. If you think he doesn't have the Force of Will, then putting the Terminus back on top would be better. And Julian with the little spoiler there. But we'll talk about that later. So looking at Caleb's deck, how do you think he should sideboard for this matchup?
I'm going to ask you that question as the resident miracle expert between the two of us.
All right. Yeah. Well, glad you asked. Looking at this list, I think Caleb's already brought in a bunch of the cards that I think I would as well. Notably, the extra copies of Pyroblast, the Flusterstorm. I think he took out all his copies of Swords to Plowshares and Terminus.
Yeah.
The Staticaster came in as well, and I agree with all of that. It's debatable the last few slots whether you want something like well, actually, let me see if I can pull up Caleb's list really quickly. It's debatable.
I just saw a funny comment on the chat too. Someone said Julian is just trying to go to bed on time.
Oh yeah.
Just trying to kill Caleb.
Yeah. But I do like everything that Caleb brought in. I didn't get to see properly, so before we do anything, I'll look at Julian since his list is already up right now. Julian is cutting all his removal spells, which Swords to Plowshares is not that great in this matchup. That's pretty obvious. He is bringing in the copies of Pyroblast, which I think are essential for the blue-based battle. He's got 3 copies of Vendilion Click and 3 copies of Flusterstorm. So he's really looking to play that instant speed control game, and I definitely think that's where you want to be. The real question is how you are going to manage Monastery Mentor in the mix of all of this. And I think Julian's saying, Force of Will counterspell, that's where I want to be in terms of answering that. So stack-based battle. Julian, unfortunately... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Unless I'm crazy, I think I saw Julian cut 2 planes. How do you feel about that? My gut would tell me that I would want my lands in this kind of matchup. That go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. There are 2 ways to look at this, and as you're mentioning, the first way is that you want to make your land drops every turn so that you have enough mana to cast all of your counterspells and stuff like that. The alternate strategy, which I think that Julian is endorsing, is that this is a Miracles Mirror. There's going to be a lot of action going on. Both players are going to be playing extremely conservatively. The game is going to go long. When the game goes long, eventually you want to start drawing into more gas and things like that, rather than extra lands like Plains, because basic Plains is clearly the worst land in the deck, since it really doesn't cast anything outside of maybe like a Vendilion Click or a Snapcaster Mage, or Divining Top, I guess. But when you have like Flusterstorms and counterspells and counterbalances, basic Plains is not really where you want to be.
Gotcha.
The downside is what we're seeing right now. With fewer lands, you might miss land drops early on. So there's definitely the pros and the cons of this sort of game plan.
Yeah, that's what scares me the most is like game one. I mean, I bet Caleb would have killed for like even just another basic Plains. That way he's like 1 mana closer to Jace. He has an extra mana to spin his top. It just feels like an easy way to lose. But there, like you're saying, there is definitely upsides and downsides, whether you want to put your risk in the early game and missing lands or in the late game of flooding out.
Right. And I mean, I'm not really for or against cutting both Plains in this matchup. I appreciate the strategy and I appreciate the counter arguments. One of the reasons that I think it's okay is that Julian being on the draw, especially, he's got 18 other lands. He's got 4 Ponders, 4 Brainstorms to help him find that second land drop. And as soon as he finds it, he's just good to go.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
I'm kind of surprised Julian didn't just, or I'm sorry, Caleb didn't just slam his Sensei's top, because it looks like he's in a really similar situation that he was before. Or I'm sorry, Julian. I had the names mixed up. But I mean, he's drawn 2 lands in a row, which has been pretty good. But he kind of his draw looks like Caleb's game 1, where he just has a bunch of cards that he can't really deploy in time to do anything relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on that second turn, so it's since we have the information, we can probably make a couple assumptions about Julian's playstyle. I think Julian is playing especially conservatively. Instead of electing to play the Sensei's Divining Top, he chooses to hold up the second piece of counter magic in Flusterstorm, probably.
Gotcha. I assume he's just deathly afraid of Caleb's counterbalance at this point, because if that resolves, this game is basically just a wrap.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, Julian might be able to do some shenanigans with the Pyroblast if Caleb makes a misstep, but at this level of play, I doubt that's going to happen.
Gotcha. Yeah, I figured this was what was coming once he passed turn again. He's just clicking in step. I mean, he doesn't want to do it in the main phase upkeep, draw step, or anything like that, just because he doesn't want to get Jace or counterbalance. I assume he's just playing this as almost as a Rashad port, just to get some of Caleb's mana taken care of at the end of the turn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, I mean, Caleb knows that he can't let that resolve. That's the best clock in the deck at this point in the game, the best interaction possible. It just does everything. So Caleb's forced to spin counterspell. It lets Julian untap, get a top smoothly into play while holding up, Pyroblast and Flusterstorm for a potential counterbalance or Jace.
Right, for sure. Now, interestingly, with the 2020 vision we have, if Caleb engaged right now, I think he'd come out ahead with a counterbalance in play.
True. Yeah, I'm curious if I assume Caleb's also a little bit scared, trying to play more conservatively because he doesn't want to just jam a counterbalance and just see how it goes.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. Seems like it. Both players sort of dancing on. Okay, so now this is actually a pretty interesting play by Caleb. The question is, if you're Caleb, do you try to protect this counterbalance?
Do I want to protect this counterbalance? I don't think so, but I don't know, because if it's kind of a coin flip, because if he Flusterstorms and then Julian has another Red Blast, then his Red Blast is looking pretty bad. But let's say next turn, if he just went for the Mentor, then it's a lot more likely just to end the game. And the Red Blast is better in that situation, because when you have Mentor Red Blast, it puts your opponent's counterspells on having to be blue counterspells where your Pyroblast is best. If Julian has a second Pyroblast or Red Blast, it's going to be useless against a Mentor Pyroblast combination.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, actually. I like that analysis. I think it's difficult to know when to use which counterspell at what point of time in this sort of matchup. One thing I do hate about Flusterstorm is that as the game goes longer, Flusterstorm does tend to become a little bit worse, especially if resources are traded early on and the game becomes more of like a simplified game state where both players have like 2 or 3 cards in hand, but like lots of mana in play.
Mm-hmm.
And amazingly, this counterbalance is going to resolve. Julian
didn't really have a way to interact, so the way that the Flusterstorming a Flusterstorm is really weird. So what could have happened is he could have Flusterstormed Caleb's Flusterstorm, but he would have 4 copies to Caleb's 3. So Caleb, only 1 copy is going to have 2 targets, so that one's guaranteed going to get countered. And then there's going to be 2 copies with 1 target each, and Caleb can pay for 1. So no matter what happens there, Julian doesn't have a way to interact with the Flusterstorm on the opposing side. With that in mind, it's possible that he should have just used the counterspell instead of having his other mana up. Mm-hmm. But using the counterspell makes it so he could get red blasted or all sorts of other things. So I do like his line, but he did get maximum punished by Caleb having a Flusterstorm of his own.
Right, for sure. And now this is an interesting place. So like in order to sort of get back in the game, Julian is saying, you know what, you have 1 mana, you don't really have that much time to do like anything impactful. I'm going to go all in. Here's a counterbalance. You need to answer it now.
Yeah. His top card needs to be a 2. Or they're both going to be locking each other out of everything, it looks like.
Absolutely, yeah.
The one thing I do find interesting in these counterbalance mirrors is if you've played, or rather control spell heavy mirrors, if you've played Hearthstone, one of the things in Hearthstone is the decks are so small that you want to figure out which cards are going to answer which threats. And it feels the same way in these counterspell mirrors, where you need to figure out which counterspell interacts most actively beneficial for yourself, depending on what counterspell your opponent's going to deploy later on in this like in the stack. So you really get to see like who's played the most Miracle mirrors and who knows how these blue mirrors interact the best.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like it's like something like as subtle as knowing when to use your counterspell over when to use your Pyroblast or Flusterstorm. So yeah. And I think Julian might be digging for something like a Force of Will now.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's see if this Force is going to resolve.
But even Force of Will on top of this deck. Oh, whoa.
Oh, so yeah, Caleb. So that's pretty much like the final nail in the coffin of this game. Caleb's Force was able to take out the counterbalance after the Pyroblast and the Flusterstorm and all the other cards that went on the stack. And now he has Mentor too. It's just an embarrassment of riches at this point. It kind of feels like the first game where Julian missed a few beats and Caleb wasn't as proactive as Julian was in the first game with his threats, but he was able to set the game up in a situation where he could slip through a counterbalance, protect himself on the way back, and then it doesn't really matter how you kill your opponent at that point.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
The one thing I do like about these kind of matchups, it's not about as if you watch Standard or Modern, where every turn you watch these players throwing punches and trading blows to see who comes out on top at the end. That can make more interesting live kind of Magic, but this seems so much more complex in the way things unfold because you're playing 3-4 turns in advance of how you need to use your mana to squeeze your opponent in ways that you could put through the stack what you need to resolve.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing that I don't think it's discussed enough in sort of like analyses of control mirrors, and that's really just how valuable mana is as a resource in terms of like overloading their mana to sort of double your own. And so when I say this concept that I'm talking about is that you really want to play an instant speed game because it allows you to maximize your opponent's end step and acting during their end step, so that when you untap, their mana is partially or completely tapped. That way, when you untap, you have more mana than they do. You have the ability to cast more spells and be proactive on your turn. I mean, the level 0 plan of quote unquote jamming is it's treading on thin ice because you're always going to be at parity. And this is something I mentioned earlier when I was commentating yet another Miracles Mirror match. When you have 6 cards in hand and your opponent also has 6 cards in hand, when you have, the same amount of mana, 3 mana or 4 mana to their 4 mana, you really don't have like the means to gain an edge by, playing at sorcery speed. Because your opponent, you're going to be investing some mana as well as a card. So at the beginning of the fight, your opponent is already ahead. They'll be up 2 mana and a card in hand. So you really have to engineer a situation where you're ahead when you do engage, and that's why playing at your opponent's end step with instant speed cards and instant speed strategy is really beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of sad that this game's basically over at this point because we play land go for 4 or so turns, then it feels like in these mirrors after there's like the one big fight where the counterbalance comes down, the game basically ends for the other person. And so I feel like this is part of the reason why people hate Miracles is this game's been over for 3 turns, but it's still happening. We're waiting for the 3rd game while it's already over. What it feels like a lot of times with this kind of deck.
Yeah, excitingly enough, we had one of these situations where it was Drago. Caleb was playing against Tim in his 3rd round of their 3 best of 5, and Caleb had counter top lock out on turn 3, and Tim fought back. Tim managed to break the lock, establish his own control, and then just win. It was pretty incredible. So I mean, not all the time, but
usually that requires a unique situation where the person with the countertop lock is missing on like some key numbers, and not to mention, especially if let's say you said Tim broke out of it. So let's say his opponent, like if Caleb had like an early mentor like he did in that game right after winning that big fight over the counterbalance, I don't think he would have never had enough time to do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly what happened in their game 3, where Caleb established countertop and then played mentor and said, "You're dead in 2 turns. Come at me."
Yeah, it looks like their boarding's mostly staying the same. Maybe some like hedging but yeah, they're not changing much. I think they both know their game plan. But one thing I really did like about that past game is something that I think that gets overlooked is once Julian realized he was behind, he just like untapped and jammed his counterbalance. He didn't really care too much what was happening anymore.
Right. Yeah. At some point in time, you may be 20% to win, but you have to understand that in the next draw step, you're 19% to win. The draw step after that, you're 16%. So you have to take it when it's best for you to take it, and that's what I think Julian did.
Yeah, luckily this game looks like it's going to pan out pretty well. Both players have plenty of lands to make or ways to find lands as well as ways to interact with one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Julian feels his hand is a little bit clunkier because he has the Snapcasters, but he can throw one of those away to force, as well as just having the free card where all of Caleb's cards are going to cost mana this game.
Yeah, I like having the Snapcasters in this situation. Maybe not the second one, but the first one is definitely good. It's just it's a cheap thing to do at your opponent's end step. It doesn't apply that much pressure, but it applies just the right amount so that 4 or 5 turns down the line, the 2 points of damage suddenly becomes 10, and your opponent's going to have to deal with it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That being said, Julian currently doesn't have anything to flash back with the cards, so let's see where he plans on taking this.
Yeah, but I mean, Caleb doesn't really have anything proactive to do unless he wants to start putting that counterbalance into play within the next turn. And Caleb's going to try to put the counterbalance in place soon, I think, because he doesn't have a lot to do. And Julian just has more pressure in the form of mana or ways to access mana. I wouldn't be surprised if Caleb fired off a Brainstorm in this instep. Yep, just like that. Just because he's got, Static Caster, an extra land, possibly extra lands to draw, and then it's going to give him something to do on his next turn, or ways to clean up his draws and get something actually going.
Right, absolutely. And he's going to shuffle away the 2 basic islands that he drew.
Yeah.
Probably going to cast Ponder on his next turn. Look for like a Divining Top or some extra counter magic.
But the second Force, I wouldn't be surprised to see the counterbalance come down. Because he has Force Pyroblast now.
Right, that is true. Awkwardly enough, I feel like, Forcible is a very powerful card, and it's very helpful in securing whatever action you're trying to do, whether it's being offensive or defensive.
Yeah.
But the investment of the second Forcible sometimes feels like a lot to me.
I definitely think that's a lot, but he could also like I foresee him forcing and pyroblasting here once Julian forces back, and then once on Julian's turn, once that counterbalance comes down, I wouldn't be surprised to see him jam Jace into it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, he's got to do something, right? Because when Caleb's gonna untap if he decides to burn the second force, then he's not gonna have a ponder. He's gonna be top decking.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to get into a little bit of luck versus skill, sort of. We're going to see how. So the counterbalance is probably going to resolve. Caleb has more counterspells than Julian does. Yeah. The question is, will Caleb end up pitching a ponder?
I think he's gonna end up pitching that ponder once it comes to Jace being cast, because he's definitely gonna pitch the Staticaster here.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would do personally. And I think that he ponders on his turn to try to set up the top of his deck for something that Julian could do. I assume he's going to try to put a 2 on top in case of a counterbalance from the other side. And then he's going to need a blue card off that ponder if he decides to cast it in order to stop this Jace.
Right. So in this situation, would you cast the ponder here casting the ponder is definitely the greedier line here. What would you do in this situation?
I think I'd cast ponder.
You would? Okay. Yeah, I kind of like that play too. Caleb is erring on the side of total safety, which I can definitely respect.
My only problem is like if Julian's last 2 cards are somewhat good, like he's going to play something you're going to have to force, then you're down to 0. And if his last card's anything, then you're way behind. Like if his last card's a Pyroblast and he Pyroblasts your counterbalance, yeah. I feel like you're losing that game because then you're going to be on lands against the top in lands. If he has a Jace and then a counterbalance the next turn, you're still top decking, and he has top counterbalance. This is assuming you blind flip or don't blind flip. If you blind flip, then that's just the nuts. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, so this is something that I've just learned over time. A naked counterbalance, just like by itself without divining top, is often not that great, like especially in this situation. And wow, Julian found a force of will to push his Jace through. That's fantastic.
And did we see what card got shown off that counterbalance in the revealed zone?
It was a Flooded Strand.
Okay. So he's gonna get a second shot here to try to get something that matters.
Yeah, for sure.
A Flusterstorm. All right, so. Ugh. This game is not looking good for Caleb anymore.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Flusterstorm is not threatening at all in this board position.
I mean, Julian did get a little bit lucky to find that forest, but that's kind of why I did like casting the ponder, because if you have to, you pretty much know you're gonna have to blow that forest on the following turn, and if you don't have any follow up and he has another threat, it just feels like you're losing here because almost any threat in the deck beats a blind counterbalance.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to rely exclusively on the counterbalance, getting a blind flip if you don't cast the ponder, which that's a lot to ask for, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and it looks like this Jace is just gonna kind of run away with the game.
Yeah.
Because he's gonna be, I assume he's gonna lead with ponder here to see what the counterbalance reveals. I would be. Okay, so it looks like Caleb has like another dead draw coming up, which he's gonna fetch away with Flooded Strand.
Yeah, so I think knowing that Caleb is going to fetch away the counterbalance, you don't cast the Divining Top now, because obviously, I mean, since Caleb is going to fetch with the Flooded Strand anyway, he only gets extra value if you cast the top right now. Yeah, actually, I don't like this play. I mean, well, there's actually upside in the fact that if Caleb misses, then you have a top in play. But
I do kind of like just passing turn. Because he's going to shuffle, but if he does shuffle, like it's hard to say because let's say the top card of his deck is a cantrip, right? So you like dodge a bullet by not playing the top, but then he gets to play his cantrip and then maybe rearrange the top of his deck to put a 1 on top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you might be better off just playing it again because there's not many 1 cost cards in the deck that aren't going to punish you. So if the top part of his deck is a 1. after he shuffles, let's say it's a top, then that's like terrible, and you really need that top in play. If it's a brainstorm, he's going to get it with a flusterstorm you know about. If it's like a ponder, he can set it up. You know what I mean? So I think looking back on it, I do like playing top, even if it does feel like you're giving him a little extra value on his shuffle there.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I mean, obviously, the worst case scenario is like Caleb flips over a Pyroblast, then suddenly Caleb's back in the game. But I mean, there's only 2 more of those left in the deck, so that's probably the only real card that could,
True. Yeah, that's true. God, a Pyroblast would just be devastating. It would just, I think, that would put Caleb so much firmly in the lead. There's that Pyroblast you were talking about too.
Speak of the devil.
Yeah, Matthias and Chad pointed that out too. The conclusion we ended up coming to is any 1-drop you see is going to end up countering the top on a future turn anyways. All right. Oh, wow. Julian found a Pyroblast too, so he's going to be able to take out Counterbalance. So it looks like this game's going to boil down to a blind Counterbalance, or the blind Counterbalance is most likely going to get taken out next turn.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Jace is likely to get, oh, never mind. This game looks pretty over, actually, because Julian gets to just cast his Counterbalance this turn. I didn't realize for a second I thought Caleb was gonna get the untap and take care of that Jace, but it looks like this is probably the wrap on it unless he's able to blind hit.
Okay, I guess we're gonna take a pause really quickly.
Yeah, that looks like the end of this match. It looks like Julian's going to be up 2-0 in just a couple minutes here.
Pretty incredible. Yeah, the end of that first match was, yeah. I mean, miracles does what miracles does,
Yeah, I feel like Caleb is going to be, like, later tonight, he's going to be watching the replay of that second game and just scratching his head and figuring out what he possibly could have done. Because it really just feel like it's hard to pinpoint to a one turn, but I know he's got to feel like he just threw that away, and then he lost the third game too. I assume that it's going to come back to haunt him, to say the least.
Yeah, it's really hard to identify what Caleb did wrong. I don't think he actually watching him play, it's not like he made any like catastrophic mistakes. Whatever the error was is going to be something that's like completely like minuscule and just like you'll totally just like glaze over when you're actually playing, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
One of my suspicions is that the second Force of Will cost him quite a lot, in terms of, I mean, like having 2 Force of Wills in his hand, but like that's committing to saying, I'm going to go down 2 cards. So even if I get to stop what you do, the top of your deck, combined with the extra cards that you have, is, I'm willing to risk that might help pull you forward.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised too. Once Julian untaps, if he just starts off with a Fate Seal, Caleb has no fetch lands. He has a dead Counterbalance, a dead Flusterstorm that are like all known about. And honestly, from here, like what are you gonna do if you're in Caleb's shoes? Like you need to have 2 insane top decks in a row and hope that they don't get hit by the Counterbalance top combo in play or the Pyroblast that he's sandbagging. I mean, yeah. He doesn't know about these Pyroblasts, but you know what I mean? Like we have 20/20 vision, so we see what's going on here. I feel like Caleb likely feels like he has a lot more of a chance than he does.
Right. I mean, in this situation, it's not like Caleb is dead. If he hits like back-to-back Entreat the Angels.
Okay, now Caleb is dead.
Well, yeah. Caleb probably has he has to hit Entreat right now. Otherwise, he's not going to make it. But
yeah, he also has 2 tops, so.
Yeah.
He's gonna get what? He's gonna play Mentor and he can flip top 4 times or so.
Oh yeah, never mind.
Yeah, it's just over. He has literally 1 turn to hit Entreat. Okay.
Right.
Or Terminus, but I mean he boarded those out, so.
Yeah.
He's on Axel 0%.
Julian's gonna take the match 2-1, up in the series now 2-0. So Julian is playing for I guess the match point or whatever it is now. That's what it is, right? Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty incredible. It's a little unfortunate. I'm not really sure what Caleb could have done better in that third game. But Caleb has access to his third deck now. We know his first one was Jund, second is Miracles. I have to wonder what his last deck is. if it's maybe something like a combo deck or some something spicy like that.
Yeah. I will say it is kind of funny because Caleb put our good friend Ziggy Stardust in the same position. He won the first two matches, and then he was able to take it 3-0. But just looking back, looking at it now, Caleb's down 2-0, and how does that mess with your psyche? Do you still do you play the same way that you did your first match? I know I try when I'm in a situation, when you're down a game or when you're in top 8 of an event, you're down, a match or whatnot, what's happening, it affects you even if you think it doesn't, and it's hard to get back in the same shoes as you walked into the tournament round 1.
Right. But Caleb's a professional player. He understands that, this emotional tilt is something you have to deal with, that it's only going to stop. It's only going to make things worse if you succumb to it. So I'm sure he's been in this situation before, knows what to do. Let's see what happens going into match 3.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to see what decks come out this time. I think Julian's going to be on Miracles again, correct?
Yes, Julian will be locked into Miracles. Iron Man style, I believe if you win, you stick with the same deck.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think actually, Caleb did make a sharp read at the very beginning, selecting Jund as his go-to deck. I think he may have predicted that Julian was going to start with Miracles. And, Jund is a really fine counter pick for Miracles, as well as, just being stable, well-rounded against most fair decks that, you'd see in, this event.
Yeah, because where Jund's really suffering is against the show, sneak and show deck that we saw earlier, but that's been eliminated already. And I don't think a lot of players are going to go that deep and play something like Reanimator or whatnot, especially in this kind of field where you're expecting the better players, where your opponents are skilled, they know Legacy well, and they're gonna lean towards fair decks where they can try to get an edge on play skill wise.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the great things about Legacy is that and it looks like we are in match 3 now. Is this
oh boy,
Tin Fins? Okay, yeah, sure, yeah. Cool, yeah. We're good to go whenever. Good luck to both players in the next match.
Yeah, hopefully. If Caleb's able to take this one down, I should be back for round 4, so it'll be fun to be on this side and commentate another round of this. But I will head out of here for now, so I will see you guys later.